Good morning, folks. All right, this is a video that I promised to give to you. This is about the 112th Pope, Pope Francis, and I get into the convergence of the prophecies of the 70 shepherds of Israel from the book of Enoch, and the prophecy, the extra biblical prophecy by St. Malachys, speaking of who the last 112 popes will be. And the fact that the 112th, the very last pope, apparently prophesied, predicted by St. Malachys, is this Pope Francis figure and how he predicted it and described them. So it's very interesting to see because this lines up with the 70 shepherds of Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu being the last prime minister before the return of the Messiah. The 112th Pope, this Pope Francis, is apparently the last Pope before the return of the Messiah. So it's very interesting. So in this video, which is about 30 minutes, I did it in 2018. It's obviously very relevant, and in my opinion, it has only gotten stronger related to this, and he is still the most prominent, the key figure to be the false prophet, and he is in perfect position for it. So we're going to take a look at this, so watch this video. It's very relevant, and it goes through the details of the 112th Pope, and like I say, it's the one I promised, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Good evening, folks. Everything new under the sun. What I want to take a look at for the Sunday broadcast, and often Sunday broadcast is something where I go a little bit deeper in or do a bit more study in something, do something rather than or different than looking at kind of articles of the times that show us where we are in these days, and they are great. Sometimes it's interesting to look at some straight up biblical prophecies, and not only that, but sometimes it's interesting to look at the extra biblical prophecies as well, those such as from the book of Enoch, the extra biblical book of Enoch from the Apocrypha. There's lots of interesting things that we can glean from that. They aren't inspired word of God, but if they line up with Bible prophecy, there's certainly something interesting about them, and there's a lot of people who put a lot of credibility in those works. Nothing along the lines of the Bible, but still interesting nonetheless. Now, this is a keynote, a presentation. I've changed the colors a little bit. You may have seen in the past. What I'm going to do is continue to add to my timeline of the Return of the Lord keynote presentation. I'm going to continue to add proofs and examples and details to the timeline. In terms of all the various prophecies, biblical, extra-biblical, etc., that seems to line up, seem to converge, seem to give us an indication that we're near the end time. I'm not going to go through the whole keynote presentation. I think the last video I did was it 2 weeks ago when I went through the main section of this particular keynote and I looked at the timeline of man. So we're going to go through the first couple of slides real quickly, and then we're going to take a look at the 70 shepherds of Israel from the book of Enoch. And then we're going to take a look at the 112 popes, because those are interesting things that haven't really come out lately. And I just want to remind you of those things because they seem to also tell a story that we are very near to the end. And indeed, they actually line up with where I see the end of the world is, the end of this world anyways, in terms of 6,000 years, the year 2028, etc. So we start off with this review or study or whatever you want to call it, looking at the first slide in my keynote presentation. And this is about the creation of man. Man was created about 6,000 years ago, and we'll call that year zero. That is creation. God created in 7 days the earth. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That's from Exodus 20 at the bottom there. So God seems to have given us a 7-day timeline, and another verse states that a day to the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day, because God lives outside of time. So he doesn't live on this timeline. He lives outside of it, looking at it. It's almost as if he's like you and I, looking from the outside at the timeline of the history of man, That's where God is. So when you look at the year 0 and then you flip your eyes over and you look at the year 6000, that's what it's like for God. He can just look from one end to the other and he sees it all at the same time. And that's kind of a real basic kind of explanation of how God lives outside of time and how he sees time. He sees it all in kind of laid out before him. He can probably pick any time in history and look at it just the same way as we're looking at this blue timeline, and we can look at back at creation, and we can also look forward to the year 6000. Well, where I get the year 2028 for the second coming of the Lord is that is the year 6000, and I get that from the death of Jesus Christ on the cross, which is the milestone event in the history of the world. And he died about 28 years after the Gregorian calendar started in the year of our Lord, AD. And that was about the year 28, and some people say up to 33, but most people believe he died at age 33 for various reasons, because he was in ministry for 3 years, and you can only become a rabbi or whatever, but when you're 30 you can only become a rabbi. So if you was a rabbi, a teacher, and he taught for 3 years, and he must have been 33. Now, that wouldn't mean 33 years of the Gregorian, because the Gregorian didn't start at the birth of Jesus properly. Jesus was actually born prior to the start of the Gregorian calendar, so about 3 or 4 years. So that's where we get basically the year 28 on the Gregorian, and then the last 2,000 years kick off from that point. So I go through the timeline, taking a look at, on the left-hand side of the screen. Can you see all that? Yes, you can. You can see Christ crucified in the Gregorian year 28. You count 2,000 years for the last 2 days of human history, and you come up with the year 2028. You back off that to 1948, and that's when Israel became a nation. And it's given man 70 years to live, but if by strength, he gets 80 years. That's the Psalm 90 verse 10 there. The days of our years are 80 years and 10, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Isn't it an interesting comment? We fly away. It almost sounds like a rapture, a returning of the saints to Christ, an ingathering. Pretty neat stuff. So that's, and go back and watch the video, because I go into this stuff in depth. Now what I do here is I zoom in even further along the chart, and I say, okay, Israel became a nation in 48. Their 70 years is up this year, 2018. They're celebrating 70 years since becoming a nation, and they were born in a day. And that's where that Psalm 90 in the bottom is there. Let's see. I'm getting messages here. So if by reason of strength, and I would suggest to you that the strength comes from the Lord, their total years will be 80 years, or 80 in Psalm 90, verse 10, as you can see listed there. So 80 years brings you to the year 2028, interestingly. So that lines up, that seems to add up, that seems to mesh with my 2028 timeline. So we zoom in even further here, and now we can look at the delineation between the 7-year tribulation and the 3 years prior to it. I think 2018 kicks off the last 10 years of human history. We're in the 3 years prior to the 7-year tribulation starting, and so I think the Antichrist starts the 7-year peace treaty in the year 2021. Now, it may not last for a full 7 years because the Lord returns maybe 3.5 years into the 7-year tribulation, so there's actually only 3.5 years of actual tribulation. The last 3.5 are the wrath of God, and you can argue with that, but I go into the evidence related to the sun and the moon going dark, the moon not giving her light, and the stars fall from heaven. Those seem to be signposts of Christ's second coming, and that seems to fall at the abomination of desolation, which is in the midpoint, which is at the midpoint of the 7-year tribulation. So that's kind of where, very quickly, briefly, where I get the year 6000 from. So that's one example from the Bible, showing that we don't have a lot of time left. So you can soak that in, but watch the video related to that, where I go through that whole orange side of the slideshow in depth there. I want to go to the prophecy of the 70 shepherds. And again, I'm not going to go into huge depth here. I've done whole videos. Search on my channel for 70 shepherds. You'll see the videos related to it. And this speaks of the leaders of Israel, and how many leaders there will be until judgment, until the Lord returns effectively. And this is quite interesting. And this is from the book of Enoch. Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds of Israel. It says, there is another prophecy that, although it does not give an exact year date, indicates that we are on the threshold of the tribulation period. This prophecy also speaks of a fiery abyss that the wicked will be cast into. The prophecy isn't in the Bible, however. It's instead found in the book of 1 Enoch, in Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds. Based on archaeological evidence, even the most conservative scholars agree that the manuscript this prophecy appears in predates the New Testament by at least several hundred years. However, the book of 1 Enoch and the prophecy of the 70 shepherds may predate most of the Old Testament by 1,000 years or more. In this prophecy, Enoch speaks of shepherds or rulers who have governed Israel not just in the past, but also in the future. And so in 1 Enoch it says, and he called 70 shepherds and cast those sheep to them that they might pasture them. And he spoke to the shepherds and their companions, let each individual of you pasture the sheep henceforward, and everything that I shall command you, that do ye. And I will deliver them over unto you, duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy ye. So that's in 1 Enoch 8, chapter 89 there. Well, these 70 symbolic shepherds watch over the flock of the sheep that figuratively are God's chosen people. The next passage tells us that Enoch saw a first group of 35 shepherds as unique from the other shepherds to come. So this is explained here. It goes on here. These first 35 shepherds correspond to the 35 kings of Israel and Judah that ruled before the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. So that's the first 35. And the 70 shepherds Enoch saw were all descendants of Israel, though some of the Israelite shepherds had overlords who are also called shepherds. After this, Enoch foresaw 12 more shepherds that would arise to govern over Israel. He therefore foretold the rebirth of Israel as a nation in modern times. And these 12 leaders speak to the actual prime ministers, basically, of Israel. And this is where it gets really interesting. It says, sadly, Enoch tells us that the group of 12 final shepherds in Israel will do more damage to Israel spiritually than the 558 bad shepherds who governed the country long before them. And so you can read about that. I'm not going to go into super depth here. The 12 last shepherds of Israel will therefore be judged and found guilty along with the 58 shepherd kings of Israel who came before them, with the exception perhaps of King David and King Josiah. Those were good kings, obviously. Most from among these 70 kings, however, will perish without repenting of their sins. One easy way to test the legitimacy of Enoch's prophetic vision of the 70 shepherds of Israel is to see how closely the prophecy of the 12 shepherds applies to today. So this is really where it gets interesting. We can do this by counting how many times prime ministers have ruled in modern nation called Israel since its inception in 1948. Uncannily, 12 men have served in this office so far, as shown in the following list. James Johnson, a fellow scholar, friend, and enthusiast of the book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, provided me with a list when the 12th prime minister had not yet ruled. And so we'll see who the 12th prime minister is. And so here it is here, and you can see all the pictures of the prime ministers of Israel. Can you see all this? Yes, you can. Well, you can basically see it. It's not quite fully in screen, but good enough. So number 1 is David Ben-Gurion. Number 2 is Moshe Sharett. Number 3 is Levi Eshkol. Number 4 is Golda Meir. You can see the years listed there. Number 5, Yitzhak Rabin. Number 6, Menachem Begin. Number 7, Yitzhak Shamir. Number 8, Shimon Peres. Number 9, Ehud Barak. Number 10, Ariel Sharon. And number 11 is Ehud Olmer. Now, of course, what we see now is number 12 is actually Benjamin Netanyahu. The preceding list clearly shows the 12 men have served as prime ministers of modern Israel, with some of them serving more than once. Adding these 12 to the 58 prior shepherds of Israel. Let me just, if I roll this up here, now I think you can see it now. number 12 on the very bottom is Netanyahu there. So he did a first term. He's done many different terms, and now he's still in power right now in Israel, amazingly. So that's interesting in and of itself, that he's still in power. It's almost as if God won't return until he's actually out of power, so he's the only one keeping the return of the Lord at bay, if you will. Well, adding these 12 to the 58 prior shepherds of Israel mentioned by Enoch, we find 70 men have already served as shepherds of Israel. Since there are only to be only 12 shepherds of modern Israel before all 70 shepherds are judged, then the time before the end of this present world system must be very near. Effectively, Benjamin Netanyahu is the 12th prime minister. So if there's another new prime minister after Benjamin Netanyahu, that's going to confirm that this prophecy is fake and not true. So we'll see. But this also lines up with another prophecy about the popes, and we're going to get to that. It says, if this prophecy is true, it means Yeshua himself will serve as the 13th leader of modern Israel during his millennial rule. This fact again shows that the 13th member of any group can often turn evil into good and replace wickedness with righteousness, it says. Fascinatingly, and this is about Benjamin Netanyahu, Netanyahu's stint as Israel prime minister was due to end in September 2010, after a period of only 18 months in office. But Netanyahu won of the elections held then in late 2010 and will hold the position until 2014 unless he dies in office. And now, of course, it's well past 2014. We're in the year 2018. He is still leading Israel amazingly. However, if Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds holds true, either there will be no more prime ministers of Israel after Netanyahu leaves office, interestingly, or else Israel will be governed by one of its former prime ministers again after Netanyahu until Yeshua returns to vanquish the wicked at the Battle of Armageddon. So there's a couple of things that could prove this out to be true or false. So it's going to be interesting to see. Since he has already been in office since 2009, Netanyahu's position as prime minister is due to end someday soon, it says, as of this writing, which is 2014. As shown in Book 2, The Language of God and Humanity, the Feast of Israel prophetically correlates with the rapture. However, the rapture is even more closely tied to Pentecost and the summer harvest season in Israel. So there's possibility that the rapture could occur someday soon as it relates to this as well. But again, interesting about Netanyahu. Now we move on to the popes. This is a prophecy of the 12 popes. No doubt you've heard this before, but I want to remind you, because this also lines up with my current timeline, as does the 12 prime ministers of Israel, the 70 shepherds. That lines up. It looks like we're in the exact time range. We don't have long, because if these prophecies are going to be accurate, something has to happen. It's not going to happen in 15 years. It can't happen. We can't go another 50 years, because these prophecies would break down immediately. There's probably, by the time you put all these prophecies together, you probably only have, say, 10, 15 years between these. Mainly because Pope Francis, if he dies, and he's pretty old as is, so something has to happen soon. So I Googled it. Who is the Pope? And of course, this is Pope Francis. Born in Buenos Aires, Argentina on December 17th, 1936, George Mario Bergoglio became Pope Francis on March 13, 2013, when he was named the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Bergoglio, the first Pope from the Americas, took his papal title after Saint Francis of Assisi of Italy. Now there's a interesting prophecy about the name he took as well. So this is Wikipedia.com. Can you see this? You can mostly see this. So you can see Wikipedia on the bottom there, and it shows the prophecy of the 112 popes. You can look at the 110th pope, and that is John Paul II. You can look at the 111th pope, and that's of course Pope Benedict. Interestingly, Benedict, what's the word? He abdicated. I got two of the same slides in there. Get rid of this one. I don't need that one. Pope Benedict resigned from the papacy, interestingly. Like, popes are supposed to stay in there until they're dead. But that would have pushed the timeline of Bible prophecy way out, because then it would have taken a long time for him to die effectively, and for the 112th to come to power. Interestingly, like I said, he actually resigned. So go back to this one. So the 111th was Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger. Number 112, you can see down at the bottom, isn't actually named. They didn't have Pope Francis in here, but he is the 112th Pope, basically. Now, this is from Irvin Baxter's website. I think I put a link into it somewhere. But he has an article, and this is from 2013, but still relevant and still fascinating today, because Pope Francis appears to be the 112th Pope, and then, of course, that's when that particular secular prophecy, non-extra-biblical prophecy, ends. There's no more popes after the 112th, and we are at the 112th right now. Is Pope Francis the false prophet, it says. Rumors are everywhere, and talk shows and internet and prophecy newsletters are all abuzz with the same question: will Pope Francis be the last pope? So get some background here. St. Malachy was the Archbishop of Armagh, and St. Malachy is the guy who put together this prophecy. Apparently he had this vision of the 112 popes from the time, I guess, he was alive, and so this is his thing. He claimed he experienced a vision when visiting Rome in 1139 AD. He said he saw every pope that would exist from the time of his vision, so not all popes, but the time of his vision, until the last pope. The last pope would be the 112th from the time of his vision. Malachy also stated that God would judge his people, and the city of Rome would be destroyed during the reign of the last pope. So is the city of Rome going to be destroyed any moment now? That's interesting. Interesting in and of itself. What happens to the Middle East? What happens to Rome? In Malachy's vision, a clue was given as to the identity of each pope, including the 112th. The clue for the 112th pope was Peter the Roman. St. Malachy wrote his vision of the popes down, and it is believed that the manuscript was given to Pope Innocent II. The prophecy of the popes was then deposited in the Vatican secret archives and forgotten until its rediscovery in 1590. Malachy's vision was then published in 1595 and has circulated on and off ever since. So again, the interesting thing about the papacy was that Benedict resigned, and this really shook up everything going on with the Pope. On February 11, 2013, Pope Benedict shocked the world by announcing his intention to resign from the papacy. This was the first resignation of a Pope while in office in over 600 years. Benedict said that at the age 85, he no longer had the strength to execute the duties of leading the Roman Catholic Church. It was time to elect the 112th Pope foretold in St. Malachy's vision. So pretty fascinating stuff. The speculation concerning who would ascend the chair of Peter was unprecedented. A clue given the identity of the last pope in Malachy's vision was Peter the Roman. Two of the top likely candidates for the papacy had names containing the name Peter. One of them was Tassisco Pietro Evasio Bertone, born in Romano Canavese, Italy, and serving as Vatican Secretary of State since 2006. Peter from Romano, many thought that surely would be the final pope, so they had ideas of who they thought would be the last one. So Pope Francis has been a Jesuit for more than 40 years, since Jesuit history is his. So Jesuit history is his history, and that's important. Francis led the Jesuits in Argentina from 73 to 79. It goes on. Pope Francis' outward simplicity hides a steely determination to advance Jesuit principles, especially on the importance of traditional Catholic teachings and protection of the poor and oppressed. So he comes out looking good, looking loving. He looks like he's a defender of the faith and of the poor and oppressed. And his life up to this point has reflected that, basically. It is said of him at the bottom, "I think you'll find a man who is conservative theologically, but very strong on matters of social justice," one of the associates said. So that's interesting there. Does the Bible agree with the prophecy of Malachy? So let's see what the Bible does in relation. Now remember, this is Irvin Baxter's interpretation of this, but interesting nonetheless. The prophecy of St. Malachy contains 5 elements. There is going to be a final pope. During his reign, the Roman Catholic Church will be judged. Number 3, during his papacy, Rome, the city of 7 hills, will be destroyed. Number 4, the last pope will be the 112th pope from 1139. And number 5, the clue to his identity is Peter the Roman. So this is what St. Malachys said in his vision. The prophecies of the Bible perfectly agree with the first 3 points of the Malachi prophecy. The Bible foretells that there will be a final pope. It states that judgment will be poured out on the Roman Church during the reign of the last pope, and the scriptures graphically portray the destruction of Rome, the city of 7 hills, during the reign of the final pope. So interesting how that relates there. So how do the Bible prophecies differ? Where does the Bible differ from Malachi's prophecy? And this is kind of where you get to see, is it true? Is it not true? Does he have, is it just a guess? Was it a 50-50 chance? The scriptures do not say several things that the prophecy of Malachi says about the final pope. They also give us much more information about the last pope than Malachi gave. The differences are as follows. Number 1, the Bible states that a final pope is coming. However, it does not say that he will be the 112th, so it doesn't number him. It doesn't give you any direct connection. The scripture says nothing about Peter the Roman. The Bible says the last pope will be in alliance with the world's political leaders, i.e. in alliance with the Antichrist. The scriptures call the last pope the false prophet. The biblical prophecies say the pope will perform many signs and lying wonders, even pulling fire from heaven, interestingly. Number 6, the final pope will influence the world to give their allegiance to the Antichrist. So he'll use his power of leadership in the Roman Catholic Church to point people to the Antichrist as being the Christ. In fact, he's the false Christ. Number 7, the false prophet will endorse a program of global socialism, one world government, causing all the people to receive a mark that will be required for buying and selling. And of course, I speak about that a lot. The mark of the beast system, the one that we're moving quickly in. I think we're less than 3 years away from that, maybe even less than 2 years at this point. All we need is an economic collapse, and that would push the whole world into a mark of the beast style system, because it's much easier to control electronically all the humans of the world than it is with all their individual social insurance numbers and licenses, etc. Number 8, the second coming of Jesus will end the reign of the Antichrist and the false prophet, and that at that time they will both be cast in the lake of fire. That's from Revelation 19:20. Let's see. Will Pope Francis be the false prophet? So he's going through pros and cons, so we're going to look at the pros. There are some factors that seem to indicate Pope Francis could well be the false prophet, while others would argue against it. Number 1, the Holy Roman Empire, which will be in power during the reign of the Antichrist, was reborn on November 3rd, 2009. Number 2, we are moving into a system of global governance. Yes, we absolutely are. Right now, through the process of globalization, world government, IMF, all these world bodies. Number 3, most of the world is presently rejecting capitalism and embracing socialism. That's absolutely true. The whole world is going that way with minimum basic income, all these sorts of ideas about government paying the way and paying for childcare, even all sorts of money and taxation and redistribution, which is just a veil of socialism. Ultimately, that's ultimately where it all leads. Number 4, all the prophecies that are to occur during the reign of the Antichrist and the false prophet are shaping up at this time, and we are in those days. Number 5, Pope Francis is a strong proponent of social justice, which is simply a politically correct term for socialism. Number 6, Pope Francis' lifestyle of humility and simplicity is causing him to become very popular very quickly. So almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He looks great on the outside, but maybe there's evil lurking within. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Number 7, Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope ever. So what are the cons to this? And I'll end off with this particular slide, and this will kind of sum up the last 2 items that I've added to it, the 70 shepherds proof and prophecy and the 112th pope, both extra biblical prophecies, but they seem to line up with the timeline that we currently have for the timeline of the return of the Lord. So the cons: the biggest factor against Pope Francis fulfilling the Bible's prophecies about the prophet in his age. There's a 7-year period which will begin upon the signing of the Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement. The reign of the Antichrist and the false prophet will be terminated at the end of the 7-year period. If the final 7 years started next year, which doesn't appear likely at this time, and he's talking about 2015, I guess, 2014, I think this starts in about 2.5 years from now. The Pope would be 84 at the time of Armageddon. If the final 7 years begins in 2 or 3 years, the Pope would be even older by that time, and all of the prophesied world events culminated. Although it's not impossible that a false prophet could fulfill his prophesied role at age 86, 87, it doesn't appear likely. Although Pope Francis is going strong right now. So how old is he now? I don't know. Maybe I should, let's see. How old is the Pope? Let me, let's just find out how, real time, how old is Pope Francis? How old is Pope Francis? And I'll check on my super fast internet. Apparently he is 81 years old. There you go. And he was born in 1936. 81 years old as of today, according to Google. So he's going to be old. He's going to be near 90 by the time we're said and done here, because I think we got 10 years before the second coming of the Lord. Less than 10 years now. But that puts us right around, that puts him right around 89, 90. Does age matter? I don't think so. I mean, people live till 90, 100 these days. That's not that big a deal, as long as he doesn't resign like Pope Benedict does. Well, it goes on. Outside of the age factor, it appears that Pope Francis, with his strong embrace of social justice, could qualify as the last pope. So he fits the bill. He could be the person who plays that role. If Malachys' prophecy that the 112th pope will be the last pope is true, then Francis is definitely the false prophet. However, we must remember that the Bible doesn't say this, and the Bible must always be our final authority, not Malachi. That's correct. But where these things do line up with Bible prophecy, they are certainly intriguing, interesting to look at and say, huh, that could give us a clue. If everything lines up here and it agrees with Bible prophecy, does it give us any further insight? And who says God isn't giving Bible prophecy and prophetic visions to people? He does it all the time. And they don't necessarily have to be in the Bible, although you have to be very discerning to understand that, like, they always have to agree with the Bible, basically, if they're coming from God. It sums up here, the bottom line is that we can't say for sure whether the Pope is the final one or whether a future Pope will fulfill that role. We'll just have to wait and see how the events develop. And he says, but it certainly is going to be interesting, isn't it? And we're a couple of years out from Irvin Baxter's comments here. So again, it's interesting about the 112 Popes prophecy. It seems to line up with where we're at. That one hasn't been debunked yet because he hasn't died. If he dies and goes away, we know the 112 Popes prophecy is false. If Benjamin Netanyahu dies or is kicked out of office and a whole different prime minister comes into office, we know that prophecy is completely bunk and a hoax, and it was never true. But so far, they're still streaming along in line with the current timeline, as many Bible scholars understand it right now. We are basically within the last 10 years, and those other prophecies about Netanyahu and the Pope, there's not a huge shelf life on those ones. You're looking 10 years out. You got to think Netanyahu's not going to be in office anymore. You got to think the Pope is he is getting old. He may not live another 10 years. So we're on a very short rope here, very short timeline. I think the return of the Lord is near. And you better know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, because he's coming back soon, guys. This was a fun one to do, and I'm going to continue to add to my keynote presentation on this one as I find more prophecies and things that line up, things that are congruent and convergent, and give us an idea for where we are in the timeline. And I think we're very close, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.